Good afternoon. Welcome to the Using Data to Rethink Your Business Model webisode by Kui Studios. My name is Sandiso. I'm the director of Kui Studios. Kui Studios is an innovation lab for enterprises looking to use emerging technologies to solve their business problems. We help with idea validation, digital strategies, and lastly, helping your enterprise become a more innovative organization. I am not here alone. You'll see them soon. So we're using Demio, a very small startup type of a platform. So it's very limited, only has 3 webcams, but I promise you my guest that you came to see today will be joining shortly. What I will do now is just take us through the intro of today, give you guys some context of what we're talking about, and then thereafter we'll start with the question and answer and the dialogue around how to use data to rethink your business model. I am not here alone. Like I said, I have speakers with me. So we've got Bruno Olio, who's the chairman and managing director of Nestle for the East and Southern Africa region. I hope I didn't butcher Bruno's surname. We've got Takalani Mazati, who is Ashanti AI CEO. He'll tell you more about what they do a bit later. And then you've got Val Munsami, who is the CEO of South African National Space Agency. Yes, I know we do have a space agency in the country. I know many people are shocked, did not know about this. But yes, we do have a space national, a national space agency. So Val will tell you more about the incredible work that they are doing there. And just to set the context, so James Barksdale, who is the CEO of Netscape, said this: if we have data, let's look at the data. If all we have are opinions, then let's just go with my opinion. So meaning that if you have data, use it, but if you don't have it, then just go with the CEO's opinion, because we need to make sound decisions using data as opposed to opinions. That's the context behind this message. In terms of just the context, why we're speaking, so these are stats provided by World Economic Forum that just speak to how much the data is growing, and the value of data is growing within organizations. So 84% of the makeup of intangible assets amongst Fortune 500 companies is considered to be data, because they believe there's value they can extract from this data in the now and in the near future as well. And then also about 85% of data by 2025 will belong to actual enterprises. So there's just a big uptake of wanting to gather more data so you can make more insightful decisions. Get insights and make good decisions. So really there is an uptake from enterprises to create data. We call data being the new oil. And then lastly, the amount of Internet of Things devices growing around us in our streets, in our homes, is just really, really fascinating. So that is growing by almost by 30 billion in 2023. So 3 times the size of global population. So there will actually be more sensors around us than there actually are people, which is quite exciting to learn as well. So I guess today we're trying to understand, so when you have this data, how do you actually use it to make decisions around who your customers must be, who your market must be, how do you manage a supply chain? Let's understand how we can actually use this data to actually help us help sound business decisions. And so at the end of it, and even please throughout the session, please do ask your questions. We're more than happy to engage on that topic. Please let this be a dialogue. Let me not be the only one asking questions, but please pop your questions in the chat section, and then we'll pick it up as questions throughout the session. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my speakers, and I'm going to turn my video off so you can see them. I don't think you came here to see me. You came to learn more from them, so they'll be on the spotlight today, and I'll just be asking questions in the background and also just taking in your questions as well. We also do have polls that I will put up later, so please do engage and just tell us what you're thinking, what's on your mind. And this is in part of a book that we just launched about 3 weeks ago called Rethink, Reimagine, Innovate. It's a playbook for executives about how to rethink your business for the future. So please do download the book as well. There will be a link that will pop up throughout the webinar as well. So yeah, thank you so much. And I am going to switch my video off, like I said. And I'd like Bruno and Val to join with their videos on. And so I've just got the very first question is actually for Val. And if you have noticed, we've got the whole data value chain, I would call it. So Val, I would consider as the creator of data. So they send satellites, and he will tell you all about the stuff that they do up into space. And these produce and a whole lot of data. And the idea is that Takalani's company must then actually take this data and make insights, get insights from that. And thereafter, the likes of a Nestle, a Bruno would then consume that, use those insights and actually make decisions with that. So Val, I'd like you to just introduce yourself and just tell us about, what kind of data the space agency is currently collecting. And also that first question for now, just one at a time. I'm very excited about this, clearly. Thank you, and please introduce yourself as well. Are you on mute?
Good afternoon. My name is Val Munsani. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the South African National Space Agency. Just from a space agency perspective, very quickly, data is currency. So we use data for making decisions across government departments. And so when the space agency was established, one of the first things we did before we even established it was to pull together a whole host of government departments in the same room and asked what would they want the space agency to assist them with. And from that conversation, there was a whole series of priorities for the country. And so we figured out that government departments were using satellite imagery to make all sorts of decisions around policy choices, around the environment, water usage, around the coastlines, and so on. So effectively, data is required to make those evidence-based policy decisions. All of these decisions effectively affect the socioeconomic aspects of the country. So it's very critical in terms of the security and the safety and the health of the country that we have access to this sort of data. I'll leave it to that at the moment, Sandiso, and then I can come back and give you a bit more specifics as we go along.
Sure, thank you. And then Takalani, can you talk about an example of the types of data you're using, and maybe if you just leverage off the data that the space agency is using, and what value and from that from organizations? You on mute? Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. Just one thing. I probably missed a little bit of what Val said, but then I'll continue. So as you said, my name is Takalani Majaji. So I'm from Ashanti AI. So Ashanti AI, we're just a group of data scientists, right? Who basically who use data and a number of technologies like machine learning and AI to solve particular problems. So in terms of the types of data that we use, it all depends on the type of problem that we are trying to solve. But in the situation with the space agency, or the type of data that we'll get is probably geospatial data, images of particular places. So if depending on the type of problem we're trying to solve, we'll then use that type of data. So, but what we've worked with as Ashanti varies from basically customer data. We've used like NLP, as in basically like words and essays that we've manipulated over time. And yeah, so it's a variety of type of data. But then what we then take with that data is if the business has basically outlined what type of problem they're trying to solve, we'll then use different types of technology to process the data, to basically clean the data and actually build the models to then solve that problem.
And Bruno, over to you. So if you can just tell me, so whether it be space data or data from other sources and the likes of Ashanti AI startup, what help do you think this could do for your business? And also just maybe mention the challenges you have, like what can't you find in the market? And hopefully Val is listening and he can answer those questions for you. But yeah, I'd like to hear just what are you looking for in the market and how it can help you as well. You're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Thank you, Sandy. So I work for Nestle, the Good Food, Good Life company, and we are all about unlocking the power of food, and with the objective to enhance the quality of life of everyone today and for the generations to come. So within Nestle, I'm heading the East and Southern Africa region, and that is actually a new region that we set up in 2018 after merging the East Africa region with the Southern Africa region. And setting up a new region is always an opportunity to think about the future and to define and future-proof yourself. So as part of that, obviously, we are thinking about leveraging technology and moving the company towards a paperless and cashless value chain, or an e-enterprise. So in other words, we want to be digital by design. So you can hear that data is going to be extremely important. Having said that, it is challenging. It's not 1, 2, 3 easy to just turn the switch on. And I would say there are two main issues. One is the data itself, and two is the lack of data literacy. So in terms of the data itself, I mean, the problem is that we've been operating for many, many years, so we have a lot of data, but it's fragmented. Because we have multiple sources, a lot of the data needs to be extracted manually. And so you've got these inconsistent data standards. So it's important to clean up your data and to make sure that we have now data that can be aggregated. And so there's this whole data governance to be set up. And then in terms of the organization, this whole data governance and all these terminologies and everything is also new. And so it's important that we educate everyone, not just a few specialists in how to work with data, how to get data, and how to move forward. So we've been establishing in Nestle a T Academy, which is really a skill set matrix, where we have a lot of training on data and on digital, but we personalize the training for where you are in the organization and what kind of data you're likely to use.
Thank you so much, Bruno. And this is a question for you, Val, so you can put your mic on for now. I'm just latching on what Bruno said. I saw you making notes there. I think you've got some things you want to share, but I also want to just ask you what, you know, I know space agency has been around for a while. What sort of enterprise solutions have you seen in the market? How have you seen people using the data that you've provided, the likes of a Nestle or other similar companies? What have they been using in the market, and how have you given them results? Thank you.
So thanks, Sandy. So I just want to go back to the kinds of data we're dealing with, so you can get a sense. By the way, this conversation would not be possible without a satellite platform. It's a telecommunication. If you think of it, if we go to a mall.
Hi, everyone.
Yes.
Sandiso? Val, sorry to disturb. I can't hear Val.
Oh, I don't know.
Can you hear me, Sandiso?
Yes, I can hear you, Val. So just continue. I'm going to ask you to just also log back in again about the problem. Okay, Val?
Okay. So if you've ever gone into a mall or even a garage and went to an ATM, you will see a little dish on the building. That's sending your transactions via a telecommunications satellite, which is 36,000 kilometers away. So your commerce is driven through the space value chain. Second aspect is if you are driving and using your GPS, all of the signals come from satellites. So you have 3 or more satellites that are talking to your phone that's triangulating your position as you go along. And the third aspect is Earth observation. So you could, for example, with a satellite platform, you have sensors on board that can give you information that you cannot see. So we're talking about information in, let's say, the infrared part of the spectrum. So you could figure out how much of water is in the plant, whether the plant has certain diseases encroaching on it, before you actually see the effects of those with your naked eye. So this kind of information is very important in terms of from a socio-economic development point of view. But the problem we're dealing with in terms of your question, there is a data deluge. There's so much of data. So you've got satellite data, you've got in situ data, you've got commercial data. How do you bring all of that together? And I think Bruno hit on the issue around data governance. We've been talking about a data sharing policy. So you have data that's already sitting in a number of government departments. And we want to bring the satellite imagery to the table, as an example. But there's somewhere along the line, there's a bit of a reluctance to share data openly. So if you really want to have access of data, you've got to make sure that you have access to the full suite of data, because that's where the real value you unlock in terms of having access to that level of data. And you know, satellite imagery is just one part of many data sets that you put on the table that you make sense of. And so it has huge implications from a commercial point of view. And I was asked this question yesterday in a TV interview, actually. Why don't we just buy the satellite imagery? Why not just go on the open market and get the imagery? And my response was that there are companies or countries that know what's happening in your backyard because they have the satellite platforms. How do certain countries know that there are oil reserves on our coastline before we actually know about it? Because they have access to the satellites and the technologies which we are only now putting in place. So you have to also ensure data integrity and the security of the data in terms of having the right data at the right time to make the informed choices that you need. And this is where it comes back to the private sector as well, in terms of having access to that data.
Thank you, Val. And Takalani, so you work with data often, and I just want to learn from you. So you've obviously seen various types, and if you can just explain the challenges that you have and how you've seen other organizations use your services to try and alleviate these issues like data governance, data delusion, all the issues that Val and Bruno have spoken about. So how have you helped organizations overcome that through your services?
It's quite important, right? I think there's enough data around, like that's been collected. I think there are stats on how much data is growing and whatever is happening. But what we've realized, or what I've seen when I go to different companies, is that because you've got the strategy and what they are doing at the bottom is not aligned, you then have data that's just been was collected that doesn't make any sense, or nobody knows how to make sense of it. So if we go to Val, you say you've got information from different departments. I think it's very important that from the top, we actually define why do we need the data and what problem are we actually trying to solve, right? And then from there on, then everything starts making sense. So we'll then say, okay, so if we are going to solve as a nation, for example, right? So we want to then determine let's use COVID, for example. We want to determine how are people moving in the country with the satellite images that you might be providing. And if that's then the problem we want to solve, we'll then say, okay, this is the type of data that we want. How do we get this type of data? And then once we get to that point, then we start talking about the technology, right? The technology that's used to gather the data and put it together. And then we then say, okay, how do we make sure that whoever needs to have access to this data actually basically gets access to this data? So, and how a number of companies have used our resources is basically just underlying and actually, and outlining that whole, we can call it the value chain, from basically understanding why do we need the data, how do we collect the data, and now that when the data is collected, how do you protect that data, right? Especially if it is your, your selling point or your IP. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Takalani. I learned something there as well, and I think Bruno was nodding. I think he was agreeing with you in most cases. And Bruno, if you can just tell us, so you've obviously been at Nestle for 25 years. I would just like to learn from you, like, what problems have you solved once you've gotten over the hurdles we have spoken about, but how have you used data to rethink your business model, as in Nestle, And it doesn't have to be a new strategy. I don't want you to give out your secrets. Just be careful. Just stuff that has already landed, that's public knowledge.
Yes. So look, with the fourth industrial revolution and 5G coming up, I think the writing is on the wall. If you want to survive, you better get ready and you better know how to work with data. So it's really the whole business model that we had to rethink and that we had to work on. So it was important that we have the data governance in place, that we then are able to democratize the data to make it easily accessible for all. And we therefore had to also work on building this data bank, as we call it, which is really a cloud-based platform for data orchestration and data harmonization, because we have 23 countries in ESAR. And so to get all that data together is very important. And then what to do with it. So this is where we have also started to recruit data scientists internally that are basically able to listen to the users about what it is that they need or would like to know, and that they can then write the algorithms and go to this data bank to try and get the answer. That all sounds very simple, but it's really important that this data literacy, that this data understanding is really throughout the organization. And so what we've done furthermore is we've also looked at who is passionate about data across the organization, across functions. And we've appointed what we call data stewards per function. And so those data stewards are basically people in the function, but they are being mentored by our data scientists who are educating them and working with them. And therefore, we are able to get the whole company on board towards this new business model. That's internally. But then it's a scary new world for all of us. And so it's important that we also link with the external world and that we create really an ecosystem of like-minded companies and organizations and individuals that are helping us along the way towards this digitalization. So this is where the different companies are now in touch with us, and we're still figuring things out, but we want to really be not only data literate internally, but also linked with the right parties externally to really make this journey and make the full transition to the new business model.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to jump in there, Bruno, on the data literacy part of digital transformation, because what we've seen from our clients, right, is that yes, you're gonna have now a data model or a machine learning model deployed, but nobody in the business now knows how to use this data or how to make the decision with the data. And I think now the shift should not necessarily be on getting technical hardcore skills like data science and modeling, and actually just teaching people how to then, what is the data telling you and how do you actually make decisions from the data. I think, yeah, so because what you then find is that everyone wants to be data scientist and all of this because that's a hard skill itself. But now the idea is actually we need to actually have people who can interpret and use data to make business decisions. So I totally agree with the data literacy part.
Thank you.
It's important to be able to ask the right questions.
Yes.
Yes. That's true. So there's a question from Nicole speaking about, there's a lot more emphasis on the social fabric change, so more focus on collaboration amongst partners. How are your various organizations embracing this? And I'd like Val to just answer the question. I know Sansa does lots of collaboration with, and the nice thing about Sansa, it's with startups, it's with governments, it's with private sector. So you must be like in terms of partnership, Val, I think you're leading the pack. So if you can just talk about just how organizations are embracing that, and anyone, I mean, either Takalani or Bruno, please feel free to chime in there. So over to you, Val. You're muted. Sorry.
There's maybe one aspect is on the value chain. So when we look at the space value chain, we bring in the industry, the universities, and other public sector institutions to work in terms of strengthening the value chain. So there's a lot of partnerships that help us to strengthen the value chain. And then we also somewhat globally recognize, I mean, there's a reputation that Sansa has that's probably not quite well known. And our reputation goes back to the 1960s. So if you take the Apollo missions, unbeknown to many people, there were only 3 sites around the world that was supporting those missions, one in South Africa, Australia, and the US. And we are now going back, having that conversation even with NASA about hosting a deep space network in South Africa around supporting the Mars missions, the lunar missions. So there's a reputation aspect that's embedded in our partnership. The other aspects, I just want to maybe give you 2 examples of where we provide services on usage of data and how that impacts on a socioeconomic perspective. So in 2018, we launched a satellite which is the size of a bread loaf. It's called a nanosat. And that satellite picks up all of the ship signals, the transponder signals along your ocean coastline. So your ocean coastline is about 3,200 kilometers, and your economic zone goes out to 200 nautical miles into the sea. So you have to secure that zone. And there's thousands of ships along those coastlines. Okay. So what the satellite does is at one pass, it picks up all of the transponder signals. And what we do is we overlay with that map what we call radar data. So with radar data, it's an active sensor. So it's a signal that is transmitted from the satellite, and you pick up the reflected signal. So it can tell you there's a structure in the ocean, and that structure you can automatically pick up, it's a ship. So what happens when you have no signal, but you have a ship? You have a rogue ship, okay? And this is where we catch illegal fishing that's happening in our coastline. You can actually, there's an oil spill because it leaves a track behind. The satellite picks up the oil spill. And you can actually pick up which ship caused the oil spill. Okay. There was a case, I think 2 years ago, where we tracked a ship without the transponder signal going from South America to Port Elizabeth with about 700 million rands worth of drugs on board, all because we used artificial intelligence, satellite imagery, and this is where you partner with the defense force, the naval force. So that's one example. The other example, which was quite interesting because we had a conversation with National Treasury last week, and we gave this example. If you have a housing development project and you want to pay the contractor, you can do one of 2 things. You can look at it from a satellite perspective and say, well, it looks like the developer has gone to the roof level, so you can go and pay. As opposed to sending an inspector to the field to figure out what is the level of completion. And last week, Treasury said to us, well, there was a project which they were supposed to build 250,000 houses. They sent the inspector in. After paying the contractor, they found out that there was only 25,000 houses built. And somehow the inspector paid. There was corruption. But if you use imagery, you cut out the personal aspects in terms of potential for corruption. And that we were using that kind of data now supporting the Department of, that's dealing with housing development. So there's a partnership that you build in terms of your business model and your value chain as well. So there's a socioeconomic aspect in terms of how we drive the data into the end usage.
Thank you so much, Val. Yeah, very unfortunate that they only met you guys 2 years down the line after that had happened. I'm very excited about the space data that we're building going forward. And so one of the questions I want to ask you, but before I do that, is just give Takalani an opportunity to speak about the solutions that they're building around data. It's a question from Nicole as well. Can you outline some of the data integration solutions your team are currently using successfully? And before Takalani answers, Bruno, Val, Takalani, please do think about the opportunities ahead that lie for us. If we actually use data, what could we do? What is the art of the possible? And Takalani, just answer the initial question, please. Yeah.
Okay, that question from Nicole. So Nicole, the Ashanti is in 2 parts. So we've got the consulting part of the business, and then we've got the product part of the business. So from a consulting perspective, in terms of the solutions, it usually depends on the client itself. So it could be a middleware, or we could suggest basically that they put in a what's called the front end that makes sure that all the data is consistent, or basically you can we basically just have one software that just basically manages all of that. So from a consulting perspective, it depends. But we, as from a product perspective, because one of our products reads data from sensors, from different databases, so we just have a middleware that makes sure that the data is consistent before we do some ETL on it at any point in time. Yeah. So that has worked because it then it makes our data ops processes quite simple.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Bruno, the art of the possible in terms of data. What's the possibilities, opportunities?
So it's a very broad question because there are obviously so many opportunities, but let me categorize it into two buckets. I think the first bucket is about how we can add more value to what we're selling. And the second bucket is all about the more efficient way of operating. So in terms of the commercial aspect, adding more value, it's on the one hand the personalization of the consumer experience, because here we are able to pinpoint different audiences that have a similar interaction with your category or your brand, and then you have at scale a personalized message for them, which is different from other audiences, etc. And beyond that, it's also about moving from Nestle selling branded products only to in the future selling branded experiences. And so just one little example, let's say you like to drink coffee, but you're relatively new. So you go to the supermarket and you see all these Nescafes and you wonder, which one should I buy, which one is suited for me? And then I can spend the next year trying all the products before I figure it out. Well, if you now overlay an app that asks you a couple of questions about you personally, and that then leads to which coffee is most suited for you and that you're likely to enjoy, then you start to go in the territory of more holistic experiences. And then on the more efficiency side, we about with the databases that we can start to provide a single source of truth that then allows us to visualize data better, which makes it easier to make the right decision. We can start to use all of data to do predictive and prescriptive analysis. And another thing that we're working on very much is on automation or hyper automation. Which is a fancy word for saying that we try to identify all the manual work that we have in the organization, and then we try to see how we can use robots and data to automate all of that processing, which then allows the people to spend time on the strategic thinking, but at the same time it gives you more data that allows you to see what other opportunities you have to becoming more efficient. So you can see that plenty of opportunities ahead, and it's more about how do we get ourselves to be able to do this and grab these opportunities in an efficient manner.
Thank you. Val, opportunities ahead.
So thanks, Cindy. So I think there's four different opportunities that I can think of. So at the moment, we've just got commitment for 4.5 rands to build or strengthen the space value chain.
I don't think they heard. And that's he said 4 billion. Just emphasize 4.5 billion rands. I don't think you put it for a second.
4.5 billion rands, and that will see us build probably about a half a dozen different satellites. So that means that there's more data that's going to be coming out of the value chain. But I want to make this point that you cannot separate data and infrastructure. They actually, when we talk in the space value chain, it's actually one and the same because they're embedded. You cannot separate it. So with the infrastructure funding that's coming through, we're going to see more data coming through the infrastructure itself. The second is, right as we speak, we are currently just putting about 20 antennas down on the ground. There's a whole a number of mega constellations that are coming through. So the one that we are supporting will have about 900 satellites. And there's another one that is being built by Elon Musk that's looking at 40,000 satellites. Now, these satellites are going to give you internet connectivity from space as opposed to the ground. And even in the very deep rural communities, all you're going to have is a little receptor the size of your teacup on your roof that can give you internet access. So you don't need these, you need the optical fiber network to fire up the data conduit. So this is also very important because we talk about a knowledge economy, but the knowledge economy is characterized by how information flows through the society, through economy, even from the deep rural economies, where you can have innovation, but you need access to data. So we're going to fire up that aspect of the data chain. The second is, the third one is around the effects of space on technology. So just to put this in perspective, every day, as you're sitting right now, if the sun is quiet, it's spewing out radiation and plasma that's coming at you at 400 kilometers per second. When that sun gets very active, that velocity of that radiation goes up to about 1,000 kilometers per second. And this radiation comes at the Earth. The only thing that's protecting us is the Earth's magnetic field. And what actually happens is the radiation gets dumped in the polar region. But there's also a lot of current systems that are floating, and this actually destroys satellites as well. The only way you can protect your satellite is by switching it off. So we're monitoring the sun in terms of what's happening so we can take evasive action. The same is happening on your airlines. There's effects in terms of communications, navigation, and radiation effects. If you're flying, by the way, if you're flying between South Africa and let's say South America, there's a region called the South Atlantic anomaly where there's a very weak magnetic field, which means that you're not getting enough protection. You're going to get excessive dosage of radiation. And many people know this, but you get radiated when you're flying. So we try to look at what's happening in the space environment, and that also affects life here on Earth. So for example, we've seen on the ESCOM power lines that transformers actually blow up because the currents that are flowing out in space actually induce currents on the power lines. And that actually saturates your transformers to a point where they actually blow up. And we've seen a few instances of that. By the way, it's not the reason for the current load shedding. It's a different reason. And then I gave you an example of the data application. I think I've given you two. And I'll maybe just touch on one just to complete that. So the data application is also another opportunity. We've tested a system 3 years ago. So if you're using GPS, your error signals on your GPS can be 5 to 10 meters off. With this system called a satellite-based augmentation system, we can reduce your error signals to within 1 meter, under a meter. And this is very important, for example, with the post office. If you want to know the addresses of each dwelling in an informal settlement, you cannot have an error signal of 5 to 10 meters, because then you're counting 2 or 3 dwellings in that space. So you have to have it within a meter. So now we can assign post office addresses on each dwelling, which is useful for Stats SA, which is useful for how you deploy health workers, even now during COVID-19. And by the way, if you're doing contact tracing, how do you know if somebody has approached you to within 2 meters, if your error signal is more than 5 meters? So we're going to see a whole suite of other applications being deployed because of this new potential that we're putting in terms of the infrastructure. Thanks, Anissa.
Thank you so much. Takalani, just for the audience, if you have any questions, this is your last chance, your last minute. After Takalani answers, if I see no questions, unfortunately, we're going to have to say goodbye. So Takalani, over to you. And if Val and Bruno, if you have any lasting remarks, parting remarks, please do just wave, and then I will give you an opportunity as well. Takalani.
Okay, thanks. I think, Sandisa, you did a good job of putting the two different spheres of, from a data perspective, because Bruno was like from a business perspective, and Val was like socially, this is what's happening, because I think the future of data is actually the combination of two, okay? So if you think about, I'm reading this book by, what's this? Is it Yuval Harari, right? It's called Homo Deus, right? So the history of the future, basically what's going to happen in the future. And then he mentioned something that was quite interesting, that the more knowledge we got, as in the more data was dispersed and people knew more, the number of wars actually went down. right? We don't have as many wars as we had like 10 years ago or 20 years ago, because now people know stuff. They know what decisions that need to be made. So that's from a social perspective, and from a business perspective, as you said, Bruno. Should I take coffee? What is now personalized, right? So that's now we're going from to a very personalized, centric world, right? But then I think the future of data and the businesses that are actually going to be different, and I'm starting to see it from my clients, the ones and reading up on different clients that we were interested in, is that the ones that are going to be differentiators are basically the ones that are going to combine the social part of data and the internal part of data, right? So for example, if in the future, everybody's going to be a robot, right? Do we need to have coffee? And then, but then what so all of those things now, and then how do you use that basically to make sure that you've got a good business that is future proof? So that's where I think that the future of data is not now using data now for business or using data for social, to answer social problems, but to use data to basically solve a whole, basically a human existence type of problem. I think that's where the future, that's where I see data going in the future, Sandiso.
Yeah, I agree.
On that point, Sandiso, because we have the importance of leveraging technology and data to become more efficient and add value, while not losing the human touch with our employees and consumers. So it's a means to an end. And if I can also then throw in one book that talks about this, that's very interesting, is a book called Small Data by Martin Lindstrom. And that is arguing that you've got all the big data and all the learning there, but you need to combine it with small data, the interactions with the humans one-on-one. And then that combination gives you all the nuggets and knows how to use the technology to solve problems and make our lives more interesting. And then the future looks bright.
Thank you so much. Val, going once, going twice. Thank
If you insist. I think the big potential on the horizon is what we call serendipity. You don't know what you don't know. And this is where the lies in terms of how do you make sense of the world using data. And by the way, there's a good example of the Google flu. I'm not sure if anybody knows about that. So if you want to figure out if there is a flu pandemic, essentially what happens is your doctors, when they see you, they fill out a report and they send it to their health department. And that probably takes about 3 to 4 weeks. And you're probably in the middle of a Google or on a flu pandemic. What Google does is using machine learning, they can figure out what people are looking for. So on the fly, people are looking for flu medication or flu symptoms or Googling. And immediately you can pick up there's a flu coming before this thing hits the department, and they can make sense of it. So how do you use data on the fly in real time to make sense of what's actually happening on the ground? And this is where serendipity comes in terms of making sense of things that you don't know about. And I think that's the big potential for us.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our speakers. Thank you to the audience. Just in terms of the company we have, I'm going to just talk about a couple of the poll answers. So are you using, the question was, are you using data to determine your new business model? And 50% said yes, so that is good. And then another 33% said, we'd love to, but we're struggling. So Takalani, those are your people, the ones that would love to, but are struggling. How has your digitization efforts yielded vast amounts of data that have led to value? It's one thing having data, but we're not extracting value from it. Then that's another journey we need to go on. And so 63% of you said data from digitization has led to new opportunities. So it definitely does bring about value. And some of the case studies that Takalani spoke about, I think, speak to the value you can extract by using your data from your digitization efforts. Those are the two questions that we had. We just thanks everyone for joining the call. There's a question here. We only have a minute left. What would you advise an organization that is trying to develop a data strategy? What roles and responsibilities are required? We are out of time, so I will answer that, Simon, for you. I think the first thing you need to do when you are developing a data strategy is really think through, like, what do you want to achieve? Is it because you want to go into a new market, or is it because you want to change your customer segment? Is it because you want to fix your supply chain? And then from there, that will inform you of what your data strategy should be, like what Takalani had alluded to, what data you must collect, and then how are you going to use it. And then Bruno spoke about just the roles and responsibilities in terms of building up the capability to actually be able to make sense of the data and actually use it on an everyday basis. So that's about identifying the people who are going to get the data, extract the data, turn that data into insight, and then people that are actually going to action out the advice from that data. So that is probably my advice to him, how you actually develop a data strategy and the roles that are required. Thank you so much for that question, Simon. Thank you to all of our attendees. We really appreciate it. Please do download our book, Rethink, Reimagine, Innovate. And we have another webinar next week, and we are talking about retrenchments. It's going to be a very interesting one. Yeah. Thank you so much to our speakers. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.